Hi, good morning. Welcome.
Morning, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hello, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. I think it's a great occasion today to spend the next 45 minutes. I was just saying in the introduction, I don't know whether you could hear back from backstage, but basically we have 45 minutes today, and we want briefly to talk about bringing the context of the work on AI data and regulation, which we've been doing with the AI Roundtable, myself, Suraj, and Pellon, but more importantly, leads to Professor O'Neill, Graham, and Frank, and they own sort of like experiences and views on the issue. 45 minutes probably is not a lot to talk about what we need to talk today, but I think it would be good to just highlight some key developments, some things that are going on now, because obviously, and I'm starting my introduction here, we've seen the issue of AI and regulation really, I think, ramp up around end of 2018, 2019. Obviously, with COVID, we have seen a lot more application being deployed. We have become very rapidly more dependent on a lot of technologies, and there are good and bad things that come with that. But I think that it's important always to highlight the good applications, and now we ensure that we have the right rules in place, whether they are self-enforced, whether they are developed in research center. We have rules that we can apply concretely to have an ethical AI set of applications. We'll at the work we've been doing with the Mobile Ecosystem Forum so far, we've been doing a couple of things. On one side, we've been trying to frame what AI regulation really is and start a observatory for our members. So let's look at all the initiatives and let's learn something from those. And then we will also, particularly Suraj has been developing, he's been doing some work on a very important part of the discussion, which is from a B2B perspective. You know, how do you ensure you can have the right framework to select an ethical AI supplier? How do you ensure there is a good exchange in the relationship between buyer and sellers when it comes to AI application and technology? And what we found so far is obviously there is a lot more activity. So I think in the last couple of years, I was reading from the global initiative on AI, which was set following a G7 in the last couple of years. They've done a survey and they found that there is more than 200 initiatives by around 40 governments around the world today and jurisdiction that have been looking into AI ethics and regulations and what should be done. At the same time, companies, we have seen, and we'll hear a bit more Frank and Graham own experience on this, have been developing their own rules. They've been part of the discussion. So I think self-regulation has started to play an important part. And then we have research centers, universities, they are contributing to this with their own research. So we have a kind of like, the debate has been coming from three different directions, and I think in terms of the contribution, and I think this is very positive. I feel that the next couple of years, probably we need to start having some organizing rules, especially around the governance, and start to have a clearer framework around, what are the different roles in AI regulation, who does what, to what extent, where do we need principles, where do we need red lines, who does the enforcement, and I think these are interesting points that are coming this and next year. I think we will see a lot of development on this. What we have seen so far is regulation of the inputs. So for AI, which is particularly privacy, the GDPR experience, and I think there's been a lot of learning from that so far. And And we are seeing now attempt to regulate some of the other components in the development of AI. For example, the recent Data Governance Act, Data and Data Markets Act by the European Commission, proposals to, in effect, for example, look at computing services, cloud services, as potentially something that that need to be regulated when it comes to the access. And finally, we've also seen initiatives on the private side, like review boards, like the most famous is Facebook. They set up a review board to evaluate the output of the decisions when it comes to moderation of what the algorithm does on their site. But also other companies, they have kind of like facial recognition has been the prime example where quite a few companies in the past year have decided to freeze their supply of facial recognition. And I think there we can see that obviously there is a sort of like something there that needs to be done to ensure we can deploy the technology in a way which is safe. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, the big gains are to be done where probably the technology requires more cooperation and more safeguards in terms of society. This is what we've been doing so far with the help of the members, with Rafa and Suresh on the AI regulation. I'll pass on briefly to Suresh now to talk about what he's been doing, and then I'll introduce our three experts and bring them on board with their own view and experiences. Suresh.
Thanks, Serafino. Nice to see you all. I'll keep this brief because I know we want to get onto the very interesting line of speakers we've got today. At the MEF, we've been working on a paper, and hopefully we aim to release it shortly, where we just want to provide an introduction into, in this instance, machine learning, actually, just to help businesses understand what it means for them and under what conditions they might even want to use something like machine learning as a technology for their own benefit. We talk a little bit about why you'd want to use it. Clearly, the business benefits for using machine learning have to be big. It's a pretty big investment that could be involved here. And machine learning in particular, you want to be working on a problem that's very clearly defined. Things like machine learning is very good at making decisions rather than just providing insights. And the other feature of these kind of programs is that you need a good amount of data, or what we call grain truth, that you can work with to help train that model to give you the decisions that you might be looking for, but not too many variables to make it overly complex. And so that's what we're going to talk about in the paper. We'll talk a little bit about training, and we'll touch upon some of the points with regards to things like Serafino was just talking about in terms of privacy, how you comply with the rules, how you can make sure that the training data going into your models is adhering to any local privacy rules, and the output is obviously reducing the impact of any bias. And I'm sure we're going to touch upon that as well. That's this unconscious bias that get introduced into your model or into your training data based upon the people that are working on these projects. So we'll be talking about ways that you can try to eliminate that too. So look forward to talking about the paper more in months to come. It'll be great to get more input from other people in the value chain, and we'll be sharing drafts of this report shortly. And that's where I'm going to leave it for now, Serafino, and I'll get back to your speakers.
Thank you very much, Suresh. Thank you for reminding the work, and obviously we look forward to receive inputs. Because while you were talking, it struck me that, you know, how much occasion like these are important to create a collaborative approach to the setting of AI rules. I think if we go away and learn one thing from others, they are doing this, I think it's a great gain in terms of understanding. I wanted to bring in first today Professor O'Neill from the University of Bath, which has been doing work on AI ethics. He's director of a center of research at the University of Bath and the Department of Computer Science. And I'll give you the floor to talk a bit about your own experience with AI ethics and AI and the regulation around AI. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So, as Serafino says, I'm director of the UKRI Centre for Accountable, Responsible and Transparent AI, or ART-AI, University of Bath. And at one point early in this evolution, we had ethics explicitly in that title, but hey, the title's already long enough. And we deliberately took ethics out of the title because we didn't want to minimize it. We didn't want it to see as something else we do. We wanted it to be inherent and implicit in everything we do. And actually those three factors, accountability, responsibility, and transparency, are what we'll emphasize on, what I'll talk about in a moment. UKRI, which is the main sponsor of the centre, is the UK's main public research body. It's in turn sponsored by BES, which is the UK government's Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Back at the end of 2017, BES published its industrial strategy for the UK, and that included a number of grand challenges, as they called them. And the first of these grand challenges was to put the UK at the forefront of what they called the AI and data revolution. And then this was followed the following year by the UK government's AI sector deal, which launched a network of AI work, including our AI centre. Our AI, as a doctoral training centre, is primarily there to train the next generation of AI leaders, but also it's about doing things like we're doing today, which is bringing people together to discuss the future of AI, where we can develop some understanding and balance of not just AI, but the risks and opportunities that it brings. But it's actually not so easy as you might think, even to agree what AI is, never mind what the risks and opportunities are and how to handle them. And you see so many examples of this confusion around what AI actually is. So the UK Industrial Strategy Grand Challenge itself talks about the AI and data revolution. And then it goes on to talk about AI and machine learning. AI, data or data science, and machine learning are not synonymous, but they're often treated as if they are. And I think it's important to distinguish them at a minimum to keep our own thinking straight, so we can make good decisions and have good understandings. And last year, for example, we had the A-level results fiasco in UK schools, and that was widely blamed on the use of AI. But actually, there was no AI in that mess. What there was pretty bad use of data and data analytics, but that was by people, not by AI. And that's one of the reasons why we need to be clear in what is AI. So if AI isn't data and it isn't machine learning, what is it? Well, one problem is that defining AI it has defeated pretty much everybody. And that's in large part because defining intelligence itself has never really been done to anybody's satisfaction. But in the interest of encouraging some constructive discussion and letting us move forward, let me describe what I think is the essence of AI, what makes it AI, and what makes it different from every other technology that we have ever invented, with all the enormous potential rewards and the huge risks that that brings. So for me, the thing that defines AI and makes it different from every other tool and technology is the moment we delegate decision-making to it. In that moment, it changes from being just another tool in a long history of tools that humans have developed to an unprecedented, transformative entity that can have its own agency and autonomy. And that's new in the history of humanity. It's exciting, it's dangerous, and it's full of possibilities. And that's pretty much where the art in art AI comes from. We use any tool, our use of it should be accountable, responsible, and transparent. But when we're talking about a technology that can move from being a passive tool to making its own decisions, which lead to its own behaviors, which have their own consequences, we better be really sure it's accountable, responsible, and transparent. And that said, I'm not really happy with the title Art AI because I'm a pedant. And if you take each of those terms in turn, responsible has many different meanings in English, and AI cannot be responsible truly in any of those senses. And when it goes wrong, as it inevitably will from time to time, AI cannot be held accountable. People are responsible or not, and people are held accountable. And we can't lose sight of that as AI develops, and decision-making is increasingly shifted to the technology. And when we talk about things like ethics and regulation, we have to bear in mind, it's not the AI that's responsible, it's not the AI that's accountable, it's people. And I'm confident we won't lose sight of that. If nothing else, I don't think the courts will allow us to shift accountability and responsibility to the machines. They will continue to hold people to account. You'll be glad to know I'm happier slightly with our AI's use of the word transparent. We should be interested in greater transparency in AI, but transparency isn't enough. Transparency doesn't mean intelligibility. Another case where we mix terms up a little bit. What we really need is intelligibility. Explainable AI is another related term that's becoming more and more popular. But again, that's not enough. You can explain something all you like to someone, but if they don't understand it, if it's not intelligible, you're wasting your time. So why is transparency important? Well, it might not be enough to provide intelligibility, but it's a start, and it's probably an essential start. You're probably familiar with the notion that AI is a black box. Increasingly, that's a complaint. And the usual argument around why this is a bad thing is that it prevents inspection, it prevents understanding what the AI is doing, prevents us understanding how the AI comes to the decisions that it comes to. And in turn, it's argued that this makes it difficult to uphold things like accountability and ethics and responsibility and regulation. But actually, there's another reason why we should welcome transparency. It's got the potential to make AI simply work better, notably in scenarios where you have edge devices like handsets or microcontrollers. If your AI software is a black box and it's running on some seriously hefty devices, typically with multiple GPUs, big storage, high bandwidth connectivity, often its own dedicated power supply and air conditioning, how are you going to get that capability or something like it out into the world on mobile devices that everyone can use on devices that have few or none of those characteristics? If your AI is a black box, we're not even as designers know what's going on under the hood. You're going to have a very hard time adapting and optimizing it to that kind of mobile deployment and use. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if we can produce more transparent AI systems, not only do we enable accountability, ethical use, responsible use, we can also explore more effectively how those systems are working and optimize them for mobile devices. So we follow this approach of aiming for art AI. We get better, more effective mobile systems that by default should better support the responsible and accountable use. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Very interesting intervention. I think I like your reflections on the definition, which I think is a quite an essential issue when you're trying to go from, when you're dealing with the technology that needs then to be explained to a non-technical audience, which typically are regulators, those that make the legislations and the policy, and I think what should be included. And I think we haven't bottomed that out for sure. I wanted to begin Frank now with his own experience. Frank is Vice President Group Privacy at Deutsche Telekom, and as such has been doing quite a lot of work for Deutsche on AI and designing ethical AI. Thanks, Frank. To you, the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, from my side. I'm the privacy guy in this round, and to understand a bit better what we are doing there is to reflect that
we can move. It's frozen.
We've been implementing a process inside the company which ensures that privacy and at the same time security requirements are reflected when we design new systems, new software. This is important to understand how we intend to deal with AI systems. At the end, an AI system is an IT system. It's a special kind of IT system, but from a high-level perspective, it's the same then to design a IT system at the end. So our question was, how can we define privacy requirements, and how can we harmonize those privacy requirements with the AI principles of AI of the company, which has been developed at a really early stage. I think DT was the first company which made their principles on AI public, and the idea how we harmonize both requirements from a privacy perspective and the development process was the following. We accepted that whenever an AI tackles personal data, PII, then the AI guidelines will affect, and the fulfillment of the so-called inside the company privacy and security assessment process has to be started. At the initial point, we look for the criticality of the system and For sure, AI systems will have per default the highest sensitivity or the highest criticality to ensure that from a privacy and from a security side, professionals will guide the developers through the process, discuss with the developers the requirements. Important is from our perspective to make every data subject aware that he is tackled or interacting with an AI system. If you do not know, it's much more critical to your decisions. So the idea is make it transparent, and transparency is also a requirement out of the GDPR. Make it transparent to the data subject that his data is processed by an AI. Make sure that you have the ability for the data subject to make an intervention, to ask questions, to tell us the expected result is not it's different from the real result. And the requirement is also to install from the business side a person who will take care of all the questions coming from the data subject. So if I'm affected from an AI and I ask the question, hey, why I didn't get this product, why I didn't get this mobile contract for instance, then a natural person has the task to clarify what happened to this data subject, what happened to this real person. And this is also part of a reassessment process, which has to be run through from time to time to evaluate that the AI acts like the developers expected that it does. And this is the key thing from my perspective to deal with AI systems in terms of GDPR on one hand side, and in addition with AI guidelines, ethical guidelines on the other hand side. So when you come through our process, there are three directions right now. If you state that you intend to develop an AI system, you are directly linked to our colleagues from group compliance, which is in charge for the AI guidelines to address those guidelines and to have a chance to ask questions from the business side or from the developer side. Shall we do it in this or in that direction? Secondly, you are directly linked to a security expert who takes care from an IT security perspective. And third direction is you are linked to a privacy expert who takes care about the GDPR requirements and the company-wide requirements we have in place. This is from my side how we deal in development of AI systems with all the stuff which comes together in terms of AI ethical guidelines, security requirements, and privacy requirements. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Well, super interesting. I think understanding not only how you kind of like, gone over and above the GDPR and the security compliance to actually look at the AI assigning the responsibility, I think, to someone in group compliance. I think is a very interesting point that I might want to come back after for our discussion. I would like to bring in now Graham from Cognizant, and he's also been doing quite a lot of work on this, in particular on GDPR compliance. And I think, look forward to hear your view on this topic. Thanks.
Hi, everybody. Okay, hi, everybody. Thank you, Serafino. So I feel a little bit like an honorary MEF member, as well as I've been in MEF in various careers in the past, when I was at Nokia and at Deutsche Telekom, and now I'm at Cognizant. And at Cognizant, we're supporting companies with their privacy programs and helping them on their journey to compliance. and now ethics is a new part of that. And obviously the question which we're going to discuss now is what is the role of ethics within organizations, and how do companies become compliant around ethics? And that's quite an interesting topic in itself, as we're discussing. So you've already introduced this sort of complexity area. I'm going to bring up one slide for everybody. Hopefully this works. Just bear with me. Let me see, share screen. Good luck. Tell me if this comes up. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Yes.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah. Perfect.
It's coming up. Yep. Are we good?
Yeah, we are.
Okay, so I mean, just to set the scene a little bit more, and I'll move more into obviously the complexities around ethics versus privacy. But we really are with 5G moving into such an interesting space. As we said at the earlier part of the presentation, so many new technologies are coming in, not just the faster speed that 5G is going to bring, but the new technologies of IoT with the millions of devices that will start to talk to each other and gather information and more data. AI is the focus of this particular discussion, but obviously, the combination of these with AI are going to make a massive impact to social networks, which are already today obviously harvesting a lot of information around users and individuals. Advertising is going to move to a next level of more targeted advertising, based also on much more accurate location as well. Different ways to consume media through virtual reality, augmented reality, and then even applying those into applications in healthcare, in gaming, etc. So I mean, it's certainly an exciting space when it comes to the kind of world of what's possible out there and what's going to come. But from a privacy professional perspective, on the other side of this, this will, although it's great and we want to use privacy to enable a lot of this, and that's the whole point, at the same time, it will increase the concerns around privacy. Because obviously there's going to be a lot more data that's going to be shared, and therefore what we already have within the regulations will obviously have to be adhered to as these come through. But then the new thing on the block is the data ethics, particularly around the fairness and bias, particularly as well as that there's not necessarily a law out there that says what is ethical or not. So therefore, with GDPR and other regulations where there's been a particular timing in the world, people have had to comply to that. But when it comes to ethics now, it really has come a lot down to organizations to decide what is their ethical position or their AI principles, as Frank was saying earlier. So if I move off that now and just come back to stop presenting and talk more around what we're doing within Cognizant, let me just stop that if I can. Bear with me. Hopefully that's screen sharing was cancelled. Good. Okay, so just moving on then. So, I mean, privacy is as I always say to everyone, it's not a project. Yeah, it's something that continues and will get more and more complex. And I think that's an important thing to note. And as we move more into ethics, we look at it starting from a responsibility perspective. We talk about responsible AI, but also I think it's important to understand, one, consumers are starting to make decisions around how they work with companies, what they all use companies for their products and services based on their ethical positions. That's new. And also that comes very much down to the degree also of transparency that organizations are willing to give. And then also investors, based on things like the ESG ratings, are going to start looking at the ethical position of organizations too. So it's become an important part that companies need to take ethics seriously and have a position within their organization for their their ethical principles, but then also that's going to relate into their ethical practices too, and how they're actually ensuring that they're demonstrating, as always, like with privacy, you have to also demonstrate in the future your ethical position, but it will in the end affect your bottom line and your brand. So a lot's being talked about when it comes to ethics. But how much is actually really being done in practice? How much within AI development are organizations actually running processes within their organizations to do, for example, ethical risk assessments? Now, Cognizant in our side, we decided to be very pragmatic at this and just get started. We're working with both public sector and private sector, and we've looked at all the different frameworks out there. And we've brought up an ethical framework, which is really bringing the best of these together around fairness, privacy, security, accountability, transparency, and sustainability. And we're actually working through now AI development sprints with these certain organizations and documenting the explainable AI, but then also risk assessing the AI that's being developed to enable them to be able to both improve the actual code and the parameters they're using for their bias, and also being able to document that for the future going forwards. So we see this as an evolving space. We're working with industry. We're very keen to work with others to sort of create a best practice or a kind of overall approach within industry. I don't think one particular company or other should have a particular view of this is the best way of doing it. I think there should be some commonality across the industry to enable this kind of assessment, and then that can be utilized in a common way across organizations. The other thing is that we're trying to look at, because it's a little bit immature compared to privacy, the tools out there. So what we're looking at now is looking at how we can automate our framework to be able to bring that with clients, so that it's not still in that kind of spreadsheet hell that you end up with when some of you have been involved with doing other regulatory work in the past and not being able to then sustain and automate that. So we're really also able to, because we're mature with privacy and privacy tools, able to establish also a capability to be able to do ethical risk assessments as well, and to sustain and maintain those. So from our perspective, and that's why I do the role with both privacy and ethics, we see them very interlinked. I think Frank was also saying there from the starting from privacy perspective and then seeing how that AI development is blended into that. We see it very much the same way. And for most companies, they need to establish, I think, first of all, their ethical position and values, and their accountability and responsibilities around that, and their transparency. And this is where explainable AI is coming. But then they need to think about things like ethics by design, like privacy by design. That's what we're doing, so that at the beginning of AI sprints, you're actually developing and training the people who are developing. I have this expression which is called could I, should I. So the developers are very much in the could I space, but then you also need to consider, should I be doing that, and the responsibility of the organizations. So it's an evolving space, but I think that companies can get started on that journey practically. And can start building in ethical risk assessments within their AI developments now. So yeah, so if you want to, give me a shout. Okay, so Serafino, back to you.
You're on mute. You're on mute, Serafino.
Sorry, I muted so we could listen undisturbed to Graham. No, I was saying thanks, super interesting contribution. I like your point about companies wanting to be more and more compliant in terms of ethical as well as privacy. And I want to bring, before we open to the discussion, and I've seen we have a question has also come through, but before that, I wanted to bring in Rafa, because I think one reflection from what I've heard so far is obviously, we are more down the line in privacy because we have a clear attribute and we know what is the object, but we also have had GDPR as a catalyst moment that kind of like kickstart the process. So there is also, if you want some, for better or worse, some guidelines that have been kind of enshrined in law. And I wanted to bring Rafa, which is the lawyer on our panel today, to get his kind of like, his view on what is he seeing in that respect? Is he saying, the legislation is being discussed? What is the level of maturity of that debate? I think.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning to everyone. So probably the biggest outcome of regulation so far, and GDPR has been kind of this lighthouse of regulation and its lights being shed around the world. We have new regulation in Brazil, Latin America as well, and in other parts of the globe. Even the United States right now is discussing a federal privacy bill. They only have some states regulating it in some level, not as complete as we had in Europe and Brazil and Mexico, for instance. Probably the biggest outcome right now is developers are on the could I, but they are also looking ahead in terms of the should I is actually not a moral question any longer. It also became kind of a legal question right now. Like, so what are the impacts if should I? So probably the biggest shift right now is people are actually having second thoughts about testing any kind of application without further thinking of further delays in terms of impacts that this is going to have in the future. I think my biggest question to all of the experts in the panel is, are you seeing the same shift in culture right now, or are you seeing people getting more worried that whilst we are navigating on the sea of data, we are kind of in the matrix right now? Hell, guys, it's the future, it's 2021. Are we actually seeing any balance on this scale where people also are worried about, what are the outcomes in the future in 5 years, 10 years of all of those applications and the sea of data that we are navigating right now? Back to you, Serafino.
Yeah, no, please. And I think good question, just fresh, if anybody wants to chip in on Rafa's point.
I would just shout Rafa quickly. I mean, what I said before was that a bit like GDPR, which took a number of years before it came through, we can't afford to wait, a number of years, like 4 years, for something to solidify in terms of like one common framework. So I think a lot of organizations are busy now in AI development. Yeah, it's already started and companies are busy with, and it's going to get more and more accelerated, as we know. So that's why I think it's important that the industry establishes, let's say, a starting point so we can get started. That's why we've practically got started, because you can take the basic common principles around fairness and privacy and security, transparency, these key points, and just get started in terms of assessing the risk of the AI development. And I think that my advice is that companies shouldn't wait, but should get started now, and it can always improve in the future in terms as the industry establishes a more common frame approach.
And the leadership that's needed, I think, there is important, because people, including many people in companies, are now becoming overwhelmed, not only by the sheer amount of data out there, but the sea of guidelines and frameworks that is starting to appear. There are literally a couple of hundred of them already. And I know, speaking to people who are trying to keep on top of it, that it's just becoming increasingly difficult. So some way, we're in a transitional period and it's kind of inevitable, but some way of converging on some core principles there and bringing it down to a bit like GDPR, some one thing or a small set of things that we can rely on rather than the 30 hundreds that are out there right now.
Yeah, the amount of regulations is so big right now. Like, we are discussing with regulators in Brazil of creating what we call regulatory sandboxes. So time and space for people to actually experiment with limited impact. Otherwise, you won't see a lot of products being launched, because if you have to comply with all of the regulations, innovation jumps out of the window all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason why forums like this are important, because there's lots of people listening to this discussion right now who will never become as expert as the people that we've had as our special guests here. So from that perspective, we owe it to educate the ecosystem, hence why we're writing these papers, and try to guide organizations through this, because everybody wants to see the benefit of it, and they want to do it within a safe framework. And I think experts in the field have to contribute towards that framework and try and guide people along the use of this stuff.
Well, thanks, Suraj. It strikes me that the sort of the accountability point that was discussed and who should be responsible, and then the comparison with GDPR, where we have not only legislation, we set some rules, but also some clear people responsible within organization are appointed not to be the data controller. And so they are the one to which you go and ask. And I want to bring in Frank, because he talked about the Deutsche experience, and you have a kind of AI controller now of kind. And how is the experience going? I mean, do you find that there is a good dialogue that is bringing in more design projects, more willingness to engage?
I would like to say that the experience is that if you take your responsibility seriously, then you have more effort to take care of an IT system than, let me say, classic IT system, because you have this impact to make a evaluation from outside. Does my AI does really what I expect, or does the AI something special like creating biases or such things for instance? So I think at the moment it's necessary to take more care on an AI system than a classical IT system. And if you look at IT systems which are not handled with care, servers staying there running for years and years without security patches and so on and so forth, and then you get the we've forgotten that there is an old IT system which is now an entry for security issues or stuff like this. If you trade your AI system in the same way, I think you are running more in trouble. And if you, on the other hand side, if you come with a mindset that you say, I take my AI seriously because I have my ethical guidelines and so on and so forth, and I have all those processes, then you can deal with it. Then you can develop technology which works for people, not against them.
Thanks, Frank. Super interesting, and actually, because I think what you're also saying, what I'm feeling is also that, as someone noticed earlier, that the mindset has shifted. There is this demand now but there is people are taking this seriously, and I think maybe we are reaching the tipping point we had before pre-GDPR with AI now, and maybe next year we really can see some development. Super interesting discussion. I would love to be here another hour, but I think we're all sharing the same. We have the next panel already knocking on the door. One final question that for the fora that came in, if anybody wants to take it, are there specific security and privacy regulation for AI compared to non-AI IT systems? Comes from Michael Zwinenberg. I'm not a privacy or security expert. Obviously, my reaction is like, on privacy at GDPR, on security at different certification, there is development there. But is there anything else that you think out there that is relevant to answer?
Well, it's not so much around AI to non-AI. It's more to do with the personal data is being used. So within the AI or in other applications, if the personal data is processed, we sometimes work on AI application assessments where they're not using personal data. Yeah, they're either using aggregated data or different types of data as well. And then it doesn't fall under the regulations of at least GDPR, for example, but it might still fall under certain security regulation. Mm-hmm. If that helps.
Yeah. And at this point, Graham, in addition, it's the question how you deal with AI systems. We have this policy that we don't follow exactly GDPR in terms of automatic decision making. We say whenever you use a system which uses AI and you're proceeding personal or personal related data, then our framework applies, which is broader than follow strictly the GDPR framework.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Frank. I have to close it there because I've been told it's closing time. Thank you very much. I thought it was a super interesting discussion. I certainly learned a bit more, and it has helped me also kind of like focus maybe the next step of the work we want to do with the MEF on this. And I hope to see you in one form or the other soon, maybe in person in the new world post-COVID, where we're not stuck on a web page. But thank you very much for your time and participation, and I thought it was useful for you too, and our people watching at home, I guess. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye.